OBR Straight Talk, episode 14. You know nothing, Scott Kennison.
Welcome back, everybody, to Week 14, Episode 14 recap of the Cleveland Browns' victory over the Carolina Panthers. This is the OBR Straight Talk. I'm Bob Evans. He's Scott Kennison. And before we even get into how glorious it feels on this Victory Monday to be talking about another win, talking about the amazingness of Baker Mayfield, Brashad Perriman coming out of nowhere, catching deep balls and showing off hands like Jarvis Landry, talking about stopping Christian McCaffrey after I think I predicted him to have like 200 yards of total offense in a win, obviously. Scott, before we get into any of that amazing stuff, we have to start this podcast off talking about how a gentleman or a female, I don't know what sexual orientation is on Twitter.
I'm guessing this is a gentleman.
Probably a gentleman. Felt so compelled, so angry to reach out to us on Twitter after listening to our entire 1 hour and 27-minute podcast last week.
Pure garbage. An hour of 27 minutes of pure garbage was the tweet.
Informed us that not only was it pure garbage, for some reason, a comment about 0 wins, which I still cannot figure out, I went back and listened to the podcast, drove him to wish testicular cancer and a slow death upon us.
A slow death from testicular cancer.
First off, for starters, let's go this direction. Testicular cancer is no joke. Why are you wishing that upon anybody? One of my followers, and I believe he's one of our listeners, actually reached out and has had testicular cancer and defeated it. Awesome for you. And was like, dude, what is that guy's problem? I'm like, I have no clue. So, Scott, I think you have some choice words for this gentleman. I don't get it. Twitter's a cesspool. It's an utter horrible place where people feel like they are high and mighty, that they could throw people under the bus without, they just say shit to them and just feel like they can get away with it. We all know my take on Twitter and it being a cesspool. I love Twitter. That was how I networked, and it's how I met with, it's how I met you. It's how I met Jason. It's how I met a lot of my NFL contacts. It's how I got started writing. It's how I grew and, met a lot of awesome people. But people like this idiot ruin it for everybody. So I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you have some choice words, but just don't be that guy.
Papa Wushu live streams at Papa Wushu, WUSHU TV. He's going to wish testicular cancer on us because he found our podcast not entertaining. Listen, not everyone's going to like this podcast. I'm not out here like some people saying it's the greatest podcast ever and calling myself a Browns insider and pretending that I'm a real member of the media.
Shots fired.
I know what this is. This is Bob and I turning on the mics and dicking around and having some fun and talking about the Browns and having conversations with Lane and some of our friends and having fun. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. What is going on in your life? What has gone so wrong that has you so angry, so full of hate that you're going to sit there and wish death on 2 people over a Cleveland Browns podcast? You're going to hide behind the anonymity of Twitter. I know I didn't pronounce that right. I think I got out of the stall somehow with it. But you're going to hide behind Twitter to wish death upon us. Now, if you're going to do that, at least be like young Scott and do it on a softball field at an umpire because he called a ball that should have been a strike and walked in the tying run.
Did you say young Scott? Wasn't that this year?
Well, that was intentional this year.
Oh, okay.
To try to fire the team up. I pulled a Lou Piniella. But at least have the courage to say that face to face. But seriously, you're going to wish painful, slow death on someone over a Browns podcast. But here's what I really want to say about it, Papa Wushu live streams. Thank you. Thank you for telling me that we're actually doing something right. Because there's 2 ways to create an audio podcast. Either you're really informative and people like you, and they listen to you because they want to hear your analysis and your takes and you make them laugh, or you go the Skip Bayless route and you just spew stuff that makes people so angry and so upset that they listen to the podcast to hear what ignorant, stupid thing comes out of your mouth next. But here's what it comes down to. We're doing something right if we're getting a reaction. Period. If you're getting a reaction, you're doing something right. So thank you, Papa Wushu live streams, for the compliment that our podcast could get such a strong reaction out of you that you would go to Twitter and wish that we would die. It's also why you never read the comments about anything that you create. If you happen to create something, even if it has a limited audience, never read the comments, because for every good comment, there's 4 or 5 of those.
All right. I think we gave the Papa a little more time than he deserved. But if he was trying to get talked about on the podcast, good for you. Because if you're still listening to the podcast, you got what you wanted. On that note, let's get back onto the good stuff, everybody. Sorry, we had to do it. It's just this is our platform. We are here. We take criticism. You can tweet us with, hey, we didn't like when you did this. We liked when you did that. Oh, you said this guy's name wrong. I might come back at you like I'm like an asshole, but thank you for telling me I was saying somebody's name wrong. Things like that we're cool with. Testicular cancer, don't go there. All right, Browns win. We've got a fun show tonight. We obviously are already a little fired up after that one. We're going to talk Browns Panthers, talk a lot of good things that went on there. Baker, Jarvis, holding McCaffrey in check. Brashad Perriman's big day. 2 catches, but he had a big day. We got Lane coming in. That's actually how we're going to start the show off tonight as soon as I'm done telling you what we're going to talk about, because we had a great interview with Lane that we're going to start you off with, because we've deprived you of him for 3 weeks. And then a little bit later, we're going to look at the Browns-Denver Broncos matchup in that Saturday night primetime. A little Baker Mayfield feeling dangerous in the Mile High City on a Saturday night. I know that's how I want to spend my Saturday night, honestly, in front of a TV, drinking a few beers, eating some chicken wings, watching Baker Mayfield do his thing on national television. We'll get our predictions in, and most importantly, we will go to our OBR subscriber questions. We've got a bunch of them, including somebody calling out Scott. So that's going to be fun, but let's get started right now, and let's go right into that Lane interview. All right, OBR Straight Talk listeners, the time that you have been waiting for weeks is finally here. The man, the myth, the legend, Lane is back on the podcast. Lane, how are you doing tonight?
Good. How's it going tonight?
I'm doing well. Scott, how are you doing?
It's a victory Monday, man. This is the 5th victory day after a Browns game this year, because they haven't all been Mondays. 4th victory Monday, 5th victory something.
I think it's a 4th for us because we didn't get to do one after the Falcons game.
It's 5 wins. One of those is on a Thursday.
Oh, I know, but I meant for us personally. So we've only had to do 4 of these because we didn't do a podcast for the Falcons.
Okay. That makes sense.
The question is how many more wins would they have had if the organization would have made moves earlier than what they did?
3.
You know what, Lane? That's a good question. Lane, in your expertise, how many more wins would the organization have had if they would have made the move of firing Hugh Jackson earlier?
Addition by subtraction, they'd be undefeated.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at these. Take a look at this victory against the Panthers, Lane. First thing that really stood out to me was the absolute precision, ballsiness, just overall command of the pocket that Baker Mayfield had. Obviously you've been around this team and covering and watching this team a lot longer than Scott and I have. No, that's not a shot at age. That is a shot at wisdom and overall experience. In your time where you actually got to watch good quarterbacks play, because we haven't really had that opportunity. I was a young kid when Bernie was playing, so I only remember certain things. I know it's early, and I know it's only his first season, but where would you rank Baker so far? And I'm not saying like overall in his career, but of all of the great quarterbacks that you have actually had to watch for this franchise and had the pleasure of watching, where would you put him so far early in his career as compared to some of the other ones?
Well, you could arguably say he's as good as any quarterback that's been on this roster since this team came back in '99.
Lane, what was it like to watch Otto Graham play?
I was a little too old back for that time.
No, I mean, I think you can go back further People have said, I said last year that people love to say the Browns are trying to replace Bernie Kosar. But I think if you go far enough back, you can honestly say they're trying to replace Otto Graham, which is where the Otto Graham joke came. The way Baker Mayfield is playing now, it's a little early to say that Baker Mayfield ranks up there as one of the greatest quarterbacks the Browns have ever had in a franchise. But honestly, this is sacrilege. Bernie Kosar had 3 above average years, maybe a 4th. And then he really fizzled out. You had, a couple years of Brian Sipe before he fizzled out. And the Browns have been looking for a quarterback. And if Baker Mayfield continues to play at this level, I mean, I think at that point, maybe you're expanding that all the way back to, is he, if he continues to play at this rate, up there in the discussion with Otto Graham as the greatest Browns quarterback of all time?
Well, considering you got to go back to Otto Graham, Dr. Frank Ryan, Bill Nelson, the infamous Mike Phipps, who, got shit canned for Brian Sipe, who was a taxi squad surprise. You look at the Browns at the quarterback position, it's always been one which, after you got those guys from those years going by, it was Brian Sipe and then Bernie Kosar. I mean, there's a level of expectation that Browns fans have, and, especially with Bernie being the local guy, they constructed his way here and did a lot of good things, quarterbacking his team when they were arguably at one of their winningest points in time, except for that era, long past. Baker Mayfield's a young guy who's got a lot of attitude, and people gravitate towards him. You love him or you hate him. He's in Cleveland. Everybody loves him, and, he's doing some special things right now.
I'm going to take you back 1 week on Baker because we didn't get to talk to you after the Texans game. Baker's first half against the Texans, and it pains me to say this Romeo Crennel scheme, made him he looked as bad as he's looked as a pro in that first half. What was Romeo doing to him in that first half, and what did you see? Was it Baker who adjusted? Was it Freddie Kitchens who adjusted? What did you see that Romeo Crennel and the Texans were really doing to him that made him look so confused in that first half?
Well, they were dropping a lot of guys back in coverage and flooding the zones, and, Baker was slow in reading and recognizing it, and he pressed a little bit, and he was trying to squeeze balls in the spots that he really had no reason or place doing. You come into the second half, and, I wouldn't say that they necessarily adjusted. Baker, he had the opportunity to sit back and reflect. Him and Kitchens got together before they came back out in the second half and told him, that to take what's there, take what they're giving you, and the seams are going to open up. You just have to be patient. And once he settled in and, really realized and got comfortable and confident in the pocket that they're going to drop these guys back into the zones and drop in coverage, and his line was going to protect him, he was up on his toes a little bit more, and he fired the ball. He got into a rhythm, and he was outstanding in the second half of that game.
Bringing it back to the Panthers game, Lane, and speaking of Freddie Kitchens, what impressed you from this game in terms of the way that his play calling came out? I mean, right away, they take a deep shot, recognizing the fact that the Panthers defense has been shredded by big plays all year long. What impressed you about the play calling in this one in comparison to the way that they came out versus the Texans?
He's aggressive. He gets them guys in an early rhythm when he can. He shows confidence in them in, taking those type of plays, especially going to Perriman on the first play of the game. He just instills confidence, and, these guys love him. He uses them to their strength as much as he can. He still has to mix things up. But when you got players that are playing confident, loose, they're comfortable, and they feel like they're involved, you have a much different player than a player who feels he's on the outside looking in, who doesn't get looks or isn't utilized in the way that they feel that they're supposed to play. Freddie Kitchens has done one hell of a job since he became the offensive coordinator. People can think what they want. It was a godsend when Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley were fired, because it was likely we wouldn't be seeing everything that we're seeing coming out of this team right now.
Speaking of Perriman, obviously when we signed Perriman, I was not a big fan of it. The guy has one of the worst drop rates in college football history, and he did the same thing in Baltimore. What has he done that's impressed you? And also, have you heard anything from inside of the building or from anybody that you know around the team that is that has maybe said some good things about Perriman or what he's been doing to get better? Because this is not the same player that we saw in Baltimore. This is not the same player we saw in college.
No, that's a question that's came up a few times since he's come to Cleveland, and we talked about it a bit in the ATI and Rumor Central, is that he has spent a lot of time working on his game. They've worked on his focus, the way he mentally sees the game, his technique and fundamentals of, getting his hands out, head around, things like that, seeing the ball, getting the ball in. And it also helps that he's got a guy like Jarvis Landry that, they go back and forth. Landry, while he's not putting up the crazy numbers that you want to see from a perceived number one wide receiver, he does a lot of work and he instills a lot of confidence in these young guys. And, Perriman included. He's a guy who was highly touted when he came into the league, and it never happened for him. He dropped balls left and right. And, he came to Cleveland, and they've spent a lot of time on the jugs, spent a lot of time with his hand-eye coordination. And what's happening is that he's a guy who feels wanted, who's enjoying the game, and he's starting to perform at a level that he was expected to. It sort of falls in the line of the same thing Greg Robinson said a week or two back about, one of the biggest things is that he's confident. He's having fun playing the game. This is something that's happened with this team since all the change.
Flipping it up to the defensive side of the ball, you have been screaming all year, and so has Bob, about rotating the interior defensive linemen, rotating the defensive linemen in particular. You had Ogunjobi on a pitch count in the first half to keep him fresh in the second half. Did that, in your mind, was that one of the big differences that allowed this defense to hold up in the second half? How important was that?
Well, I think the way the flow of the game changed had a lot to do with that. I mean, sure, anytime you can rotate players in and out and you can keep them fresh, or it's a help, and it's what we've seen after a couple brief meetings earlier in the season where the defense and the defensive linemen talked to Clyde Simmons and Greg Williams, about this type of thing, and we're seeing more and more of them rotating guys in and out, and it does help. But the only problem is that you're looking at a team that you look at the interior of the defense, and they really need help on the inside. It's something you're going to see them address in the off season. You need a 3T, and until they get another off season of procuring talent and getting it in here and taking this thing to the next level, you're going to continue to see them struggle against the run and struggle at times to get to the quarterback outside of Myles Garrett or them blitzing.
Staying on the defensive side of the ball, Jannard Avery has played pretty well. Is he going to step into the vacated spot of Heart of a Lemming next year? Because Christian Kirksey's going to come back and go to that one outside spot. Schilbert's going to be locked in. Or do they try to they're not going to put him on the end for Myles Garrett or for Agba because those positions are locked up. Does he step into Jamie Collins' position next year?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that the end spot opposite of Myles Garrett is locked up by Agba. I'm still one of the people that believe that sliding him inside may be the best thing for him. He's pretty good against the run. He doesn't give you much in the pass. They're looking for another dynamic coming off the edge in which they believe Avery could eventually develop. For that guy, there are a lot of questions. He's playing better in space when he's taking on that role. It's going to be interesting to see. I would say outside of Schobert right now that the two linebacking positions, one's definitely in question, and I'm not 100% sure that the other one's as solid as maybe the player's contract would make you think it is.
My last question, Lane, is it's going directly to the job the Browns did against Christian McCaffrey. Yes, he had 2 touchdowns, but you held one of the most dynamic players in the league who's been stuffing the stat sheet in both the run and the pass game to 101 yards of total offense. He was my biggest concern heading into the game. I know he was Scott's. What did you see the Browns doing to kind of to minimize the impact that McCaffrey had on that game?
I saw offensive coordinator Norv Turner actually blow it on Sunday. He incorporated McCaffrey. What did he have, 7 touches early in the game, and that got away from them. They got away from, running the football. They got away from getting it to him on the flank. The Browns, I'm sure they rotated over. You've seen Jamie Collins, sliding over, and there was many times McCaffrey, there was opportunities there, and I'm not sure what Norv Turner, what their plan was after that first series too, but in my opinion is that the Panthers blew it when it came to McCaffrey and facing the Browns defense.
My final question is revisiting the discussion about Greg Williams and Freddie Kitchens. When this move happened, you were originally of the opinion that Greg Williams had to go on a pretty massive run to get serious consideration for this head coaching spot. Are you still of that opinion? Has he been doing enough to change your opinion on whether or not he's a legitimate contender for this job? Or does he, if he wins out and he goes 6-2, or is he pretty much still just a placeholder?
It's a tough question because you just don't know what's going on in the mind of John Dorsey. I mean, if you look at Greg Williams, where this team was when he took on the interim head coaching spot, how they were playing compared to where they are today and where they could be in 3 more weeks if they say they run the table. It's going to be interesting. The team's 8-7-1 in the playoff hunt, not retaining them, but I can also see where John Dorsey won't retain them. I don't believe that he's going to be the head coach of this team heading into next season. I'd be very surprised. But, stranger things have happened, and you have to consider everything with what this guy's done, especially if they run the table. He's done a hell of a job at something that we haven't witnessed in Cleveland for quite a long time. And where the team was sitting when he took over, you really couldn't fathom that they would be in the position that they could be in. So, the guy deserves it. He's sure he looks the part. We'll find out in 3 weeks how this team finishes up this season and see what's next. But, he deserves to at least be in the discussion.
I'm torn on this because I don't know what's best for the Browns long term. On one hand, as you said, you've got a guy who his attitude, his fire has inspired this team to play some pretty good football since he took over. And since you got everybody's favorite head coach out of that locker room, and the destruction that was going on in there and the distraction. And yet at the same time, if you miss out on a John D. Filippo, if you miss out on a Lincoln Riley because you gave Greg Williams a year or two and that act of being a psychopath with his hair on fire stops getting the results that it needs to get midway through next season and simply dialing up the old Engage 8 from Madden and the Red Dog Silver Strike doesn't get the job done, then where are you? I'm torn. I don't know. I would hate to see him go and lose that fire and that dynamic that this defense has, that attitude, that confidence would go. But at the same time, is he the right guy to lead this team in the future? It's a tough call. Don't want to be John Dorsey.
Yeah, I am of the belief that the feelers will be out there for a couple names. And if they don't hear what they want to hear, then maybe the direction can change. And there's another aspect in this thing. It's going to be Jimmy Haslam. If this team goes 8-7-1, it's going to be very difficult for Jimmy Haslam to not want Greg Williams to come back because he's never had a team in that position. He's never had the ability to sit back in his and smile seeing W's on the board. So, the more Greg Williams wins, I think there's more pressure on John Dorsey because I believe Jimmy Haslam will be more reluctant to change than he would if they were just losing games as they were with Hugh Jackson. It's going to be an interesting couple months here.
Great stuff as always, Lane. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy life schedule. We know you've got a lot going on to join the podcast tonight. As always, any parting words you would like to leave the audience with before you go?
It's just another week. Come Saturday in Denver, the Browns should win again. And that's all we're going to say.
Oh, very nice. All right, Lane. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the time. Have a good night. All right, Scott, that was great stuff as always with Lane. You know, he really crushed it. I love his comment about one of the biggest Browns needs. And, you know, we saw our boy Larry O out there gutting it out just with a torn, I mean, he's got a torn bicep tendon. Like, when I had a partially torn bicep tendon, I couldn't lift up a 20-pound weight without my arm just wreathing in pain. Just absolutely, I don't even know if wreathing is a word, but it's good for now. It was just awful. And this dude is out here playing football, playing good football. But one thing that Lane called out, and I wanted to bring it up now because we've had a lot of questions about it over on the OBR, the Browns need a 3-tech. And, you know, Lane talked about it. It's been talked about by everybody on our site. But I loved that he specifically pointed that out because, you know, while we have an improved Browns defense, and they did a hell of a job slowing down Christian McCaffrey to the tune of only 101 yards, this team is going to be so much better after they make some additions in the draft, make some additions in free agency. But if a starting defensive tackle next to Larry O is not priority 1A or 1B, we're doing something wrong this offseason.
On defense, you've got to get someone to put next to him. I would want your traditional run-clogging defensive tackle to clog up the middle, take up some space. You know, you're not looking for a 3-4 nose tackle, obviously, but you need someone big and disruptive on that line who can be your run stopper on that line to allow Larry O to be a little more disruptive and attacking so he can be your pressure defensive tackle like he's been, and that's what he's good at. You said there's some other spots there. That's probably number one, maybe 1A. I think you need a dynamic playmaking outside linebacker because I don't think you have that. I think in Christian Kirksey, what you have is a smart linebacker who puts himself in position to make plays, but he's never going to be your game-altering outside linebacker. I think in Joe Schobert, you have a smart linebacker who plays intelligently, makes some plays, makes tackles, but he's never going to be the guy that's going to completely go out there and change the whole shape of a game. I think you do need an outside linebacker that you can count on to get outside, set the edge, cut off plays to the outside, cover a little bit over the middle if he has to, you know, play some coverage on a tight end so that you can do some more dynamic things and not always be, hey, look, second string tight end who's a bum who hasn't caught more than 3 passes in a game lit us up for 101 and a touchdown. You need a linebacker. And then I think the third thing that you need on this team is you obviously need cornerback 2. I don't think you have cornerback 2. I know Mitchell's been injured all year. I don't think you have a cornerback opposite of Denzel Ward. I think you have a collection of 3s. And I think when if you slot Terrence Mitchell and you slot Gaines and you slot TJ Carey when he's healthy into the 3rd and 4th cornerback roles, you're going to be in a better situation. And I think those are 3 things you got to add on defense. But I would agree with you that first and foremost, you need to solidify that line. You have a chance to, if you get a defensive tackle opposite of Ogunjobi, you have a chance to have a plus defensive line every single game you walk into where you put the check mark for who has the advantage. The Browns will have the advantage in defensive line in almost every game they play if you can get a good, solid, borderline all-pro defensive tackle to sit outside next to Larry O.
So I know we got a little off topic there, a little off track, but I wanted to talk about that because, you know, Lane talked about the 3-tech and then he also talked about the linebackers. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Let's go back to that win. Let's talk about the game specifically. Holy Baker Mayfield.
That's the greatest throw I've ever seen a quarterback make in my life.
I'm not going to go that far because I saw about 400 people on Twitter say that, and everybody likes to live in the moment, and it was a hell of a throw. One of the best I've seen. But I just remember I've seen Aaron Rodgers do that, like running. And then for me personally, I think I told this story on the podcast before, or at least on our shows. Back when I was a freshman in college, I went down to Miami of Ohio just randomly for one weekend with a couple of buddies. We just road tripped at like 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. and just drove through the night. And it was Miami of Ohio's homecoming game, Miami versus Akron. And so it was Big Ben versus Charlie Fry. And I watched Ben Roethlisberger running full speed to the sideline, looking at the sideline like he was going to step out, and then all of a sudden at the last second, his eyes turn upfield and he chucks a ball with his entire body going right. Similar to how Baker's body was going left, but like even more square up with the sidelines, chucks it 65 yards to a wide open guy in the back corner of the end zone. First off, I don't know how the hell he saw the guy. He was running the other way, and the guy was on in the left corner of the end zone and just chucks it 65 yards down the field on a rope. So, like, that's one of the best, if not the best throw I've ever seen. Now, not a lot of people would get to see that because not everybody was watching Miami of Ohio versus Akron in the fall of 2003. But no, the throw was just ballsy.
Maybe it's not the greatest throw of all time. It reminds me of, I hate this guy and I can't believe I say it. It reminds me of a throw John Elway made from like 45 yards out on a frozen rope, like he was throwing 20 yards over the middle for a game-winning touchdown as time expired. It's just Baker Mayfield on the run, throws a laser into a window that, I mean, he had maybe, a foot?
It
was maybe smaller than 1 foot of a radius to put that pass. It's into triple coverage, and it just finds Landry. And I mean, it's one of the most insane passes you'll ever see. There's no questions about Baker Mayfield's arm, and I mean, people had questions about the kid's arm. There's no questions left about the kid's arm.
No, I mean, 18 of 22, 238 and a touchdown. Absolute amazing command of the offense. Just as we talked about on the podcast last week, where I thought this was going to have the potential to be a shootout, and it pretty much, in terms of the score-wise, read shootout. I mean, it was a little bit slower than the shootout that I expected, but Baker owned the Panthers. And let's start with giving a big shout-out and a big kudos and a big, I'm huge about saying I might have been wrong on something, so let me break it out right now. Hell of a job by Brashad Perriman. I love the stories coming out that before the game started, Baker told Brashad, just haul ass, and I'm going to you on the first play of the game. And that's just, Jared Mueller, one of our awesome Browns writers over at the OBR. He had a nice in-depth for our subscribers study on all of the big plays that the Panthers had given up. And he specifically called out a similar play to that one from the reel. So to see the Browns go out there, but man, Brashad Perriman, I understand it's only 2 catches for 81 yards. I understand one of those is a 66-yard bomb that took it down to start the game. But this is a guy, as I talked about a little bit before in our opening, where this is a guy who struggled with drops in his collegiate career. Struggled with drops after being a first-round pick for the Ravens. This is a guy that when the Browns signed him, I was like, okay, yeah, it'll be fun, but the dude can't catch the ball. And I had a couple people on Twitter, no, Baker's that good. He's going to make him catch the ball better. Now, listen, I'm not going that far. As Lane said during our interview, he's been putting in the work, extra time with Jugs Machines, extra time with the coaching staff, working hard with Jarvis Landry. This is a guy that I, first off, want to apologize for writing off. He's showing stuff. I'm not saying he's going to be on this roster next year. He's still going to have to earn it. They still have a ton of money and a ton of draft capital to work with where they're going to add younger, proven guys. But here's a guy in Perriman, 25 years old, former first-round pick, elite of elite speed. I mean, he's got you don't get better than I think it was like a 4.3 140 unless you're like Tyreek Hill. You're not going to get much better than that at the receiver position. And if this guy's hands continue to improve the way they're improving now, I'm not going to say he's a wide receiver one, type of guy, because I don't believe really too much anymore. When you have a quarterback like Baker Mayfield, I don't believe in the wide receiver one, wide receiver two, wide receiver three designations. I think it's just everybody has a certain route tree and a certain, type of pass that they're good at catching. I mean, you get guys who, like, if you want to add a big-bodied guy who's a jump ball guy in the back of the end zone at like the 4th or 5th round, like, he has a role. I just think that, like, with a quarterback like Baker Mayfield, especially when you look at Drew Brees of the world, you don't, like, Michael Thomas has turned into a number one, and he looked like that guy at Ohio State, but you don't actually need a legit number one in that case. You need a guy who can do certain things that your other receivers can't. What Perriman can do is he kind of reminds me of, and I'm going to, guy that the Saints had, Devery Henderson. So just a burner, just a guy that would, and I always go back to the Saints because it's the Drew Brees, Baker Mayfield comp I've had for like 2 years now. Devery Henderson was a guy that nobody really knew about him, right? He would just hang out. He'd be like the wide receiver 4 for the Saints, come in on certain plays. And then all of a sudden you look up, boom, there goes Devery Henderson down and Breeze airs it out. And like all of a sudden it's a 50-yard catch. And the box score at the end of the game would read like 3 catches, 71 yards. But one of them is that big 50-yard play that just broke open, took the top off the defense and just broke open the game. If Brashad Perriman can develop into that guy, and I know a lot of you are probably saying, well, wait, I thought that's what Antonio Callaway's job is. But Antonio Callaway is expected to be much more than that guy. Like, he's expected to develop into the complementary piece next to Jarvis Landry. Maybe not be a 1 receiver, be a solid 2. It's okay to have a bunch of 2s. Like, you can have 3 number 2 receivers, and if they all can do different things, Jarvis works the underneath. Jarvis can go over the top. Jarvis works the underneath. Callaway takes it off the top. But if you can work a guy in like Perriman as your fourth wide receiver, and he can be that Devery Henderson who just burns ass, hauls ass down the field, and takes the top off the defense and makes you respect and pull that man out of the box, like the Browns could hit, they could strike gold here, which this is usually the type of player we give to other teams. And I know I just ranted for like 4 minutes about giving kudos about Brashad Perriman, but like, I was so impressed. I mean, we're talking a guy who had 2 catches for 81 yards, but I'm so impressed with the development, and it's incredible.
Well, he's a feel-good story. You want to root for guys to turn their career around like this. And whether he's on the Cleveland Browns next year or not, he's probably kept himself in the league for a couple more years at least to give himself a chance to save his career and turn his career around and to have an NFL career. He's not doing things that make you think that a team's going to go out and throw him a big contract next year and he's in line to be a 2 or a 1 or even a 3, but he's doing what you need your fourth wide receiver to do, exactly what you said. He can run, he can get behind the defense, he can do the speedster routes, he's willing to come in and play that role, and he's been effective. If you throw him the ball, he's catching the ball. He's running his routes where he's supposed to, and even if he's just drawing coverage away from the target, he's doing what he's supposed to. And a big part of your fourth wide receiver is running your routes crisply and correctly and selling that you might be the targeted wide receiver, so the defense has to respect you. And he's doing that. And earlier in the year, there were games earlier this year that the Browns did not have someone who could do that. They just didn't. They had Jarvis Landry and a bunch of guys that they just ran in off the practice squad that had never caught an NFL pass. And that's where you were. I forget what game that was. Was it the Buccaneers game? Was it the game after that? There was one of those games early in the year where you had Jarvis Landry and your next most experienced receiver was Callaway with 7 NFL catches.
It was the game, I forget who we were playing, but it was the game after Higgins went down with the injury. Because Streeter was expected to play, and I think he got hurt like right away in that game. Like the first play, I think it was a home game. So I don't know if it was the Buccaneers game, but he got hurt like the first play of the game, and you were literally down to Callaway, and I think there's somebody else they started. Was that Perriman's first game? No, Ratley. Ratley came out there, and Ratley was like playing a bunch of snaps, and you can't even find the field now. So
it's been a rally. This wide receiver core has been interesting this year. It's gone from good to god-awful bad, historically god-awful bad, to back to being good. Or functional, at least. It's a functional wide receiving core.
So there's a lot of things that we could talk about in this game, and obviously we just gushed over Baker and Perriman for like 10 minutes. I'm going to change it up how we kind of do this. Let's put your feet to the fire here. 2 things that you really liked about this game. 1 from the offensive side of the ball, not Baker Mayfield. 1 from the defensive side of the ball.
Now that really is throwing my feet right to the fire in this.
Blame Lane, because Lane had such a great breakdown of the game. Like, we could go in depth on all of these things, but I just wanted to like put your feet to the fire. One non-Baker Mayfield thing on offense.
The overall play of the offensive line, where Baker Mayfield wasn't running for his life, didn't look scared, didn't look like he was seeing 8 blitzers when there was only 4. I can't tell you that the offensive line gets an A. I can't tell you that they were moving guys around out there and opening holes at will. But late in the game, when you needed to run the ball to run the clock out, they were able to run the ball and get a first down. Now, look, they had to give that ball back, but you were able to run the ball, and you didn't go 3 and out late in that game either when they knew you were running the football. So overall on offense, I was pleased with the mediocrity of the offensive line throughout that entire game.
Defensive positive.
Can I say Luke Kuechly running down Jarvis Landry, which I thought was very impressive, and we didn't talk about enough. Jarvis Landry getting chased down by Luke Kuechly from behind. No, that's on the Panthers. I know. Okay. I've given this guy a lot of crap. Heart of a Lemming played an effective game, and on the first touchdown, he made an effort play to almost stop that touchdown. Heart of a Lemming was out there and wasn't just running around doing nothing and making the Browns play 10 on 11.
For a reminder, maybe some of you new listeners, Heart of a Lemming is Jamie Collins.
So I got to give him credit. I bash him. He had a good game, and it wasn't 10 on 11 this week.
You know, it's funny. So early on in the game, he had a couple of just awful effort plays, and I tweeted out, all right, I'm officially throwing a going away party for Jamie Collins for when he gets cut this offseason. And I said it out loud at the bar that I was watching the game at. Dude, they loved it. All the old guys were just laughing their asses off. They're like, have it here. We want to celebrate with you. I'm like, oh, man. So
it wasn't a great game, but just like the offensive line, I'm happy with the mediocrity of Jamie Collins in this game.
And you know what's kind of... So you say that, and you know it's kind of interesting. Mediocrity in the past would be getting blown out or losing, right? What a world of difference having the quarterback makes. Because if you just have average play from a lot of your positions on your team, and you have the guy at quarterback making big plays, we're living in the upside down. That's where we're at. We're in the upside down. My positive on the offensive side of the ball, I got to give a lot of love to Freddie Kitchens. I know he's not a player, but that man is coming out aggressive, 0 Fs given right now, proving to the world that not only does he belong as an offensive coordinator in this league, that he could end up changing the entire way that the Browns offseason and head coaching decision was going to go. Like everybody since the minute that Baker Mayfield was drafted and we saw the shit show that was Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley, everybody's like, we need that young up-and-coming offensive coordinator, offensive mind to be our future head coach. We need our Sean McVay. We need to bring Flip back. I was sitting here beating the drum for Flip. I'm like, Flip's my guy. Flip's my McVay. We need to go get Lincoln Riley, people were saying. But now you have this guy in Freddie Kitchens who, as we talked about before, groomed by Bruce Arians. And now you have this kind of, as Lane put it, in the Houston game, right? Baker has this bad first half. And what happens at halftime? Baker and Freddie get together in the locker room and come up with a plan of action for the second half, and Baker goes out and has one of his best halves of football since he's been in the league. I talked to Lane about, is the Greg Williams conversation changing? I'm not sure that you can screw with this at all. I think Freddie Kitchens is almost locked in any coaching interview goes, you could take this job, but you're not moving Freddie Kitchens. Right. But at the same point in time, do you just not screw with any of the dynamic going, something's going on in this locker room and it's building and there's an attitude and this team is believing. And it's one of those things where do you screw with any of it to try to make it better? It's an old analogy about Star Wars to George Lucas where he goes, George Lucas is the guy who created the perfect sandwich 20 years ago and has been throwing salt and pepper down his throat for the last 2 decades to try to make it better. Something's going on. I don't know what any of that means. Something's going on here, and do you risk screwing with it at all? I don't know if you do. It's as Lane said, it's going to be very interesting what they decide to do with this coaching discussion in the offseason. So back to Kitchens in this game, comes out, realizes that his opponent has a weakness. Boom, what's he do? Attacks that weakness from the first damn play of the game. I haven't seen a Browns offensive coordinator do that since, I don't know, 2014 maybe? Yeah. You might have to go back that far. I was going to say Lindy Infante, but gets creative at the goal line with the jet. I don't know. I need Jake to tell me exactly what it is, but the jet action handoff to Jarvis Landry. I love that play. Then comes back, says, "Oh, remember when you couldn't stop this play at the goal line? I'm going to run it from midfield too and let Jarvis take off on another 45-yard run." Like the innovation, everything that we've spoken about that we want in our next head coach because we feel the need to have that offensive-minded head coach. Like Freddie's laying the foundation saying, "Listen, guys, I got this. Now I can make your life a whole lot easier." And whether that's Greg Williams staying as the head coach or Bruce Arians coming in with the understanding that he's already got a relationship with Freddie. Freddie does his thing. Not going to be any problems there. So now you just have to worry about essentially one relationship. Bruce Arians and Greg Williams. Can they coexist with Greg going back to DC? Or is it, okay, Greg wants to go ahead and, move on because this isn't, him and Arians can't work. It's not that they can't work together, but Bruce wants his guy and wants his scheme and Williams, doesn't fit it. Yeah. So then you bring in a Chuck Pagano. So, but back to Kitchens, kudos, great job for Freddie. I mean, that's great. Defensive side of the ball, I got to give a big shout out to frickin' Terrence Mitchell. That dude has not played football for 8 weeks. broken forearm, I think it was. I mean, that when he hurt his arm, I thought he was done for the year. Like his forearm was just dangling. Comes in, Denzel Ward out with a concussion. Comes in off the streets. I mean, he's been practicing for like a week or so. Plays 71 of 74 defensive snaps. Or overall snaps. I don't know if that included special teams. 71 of 74 snaps in this game.
And don't get me wrong when I said earlier, I'm not sure the Browns have a second number 2 cornerback. That don't think that means I'm not a big fan of Mitchell. But I'm not sure I believe it completely yet. I want him on this team. I want him on this team for a long time. But I do think they need to upgrade it at corner, at least depth overall. But dude, every time he's been in the field this year, he's played well. He really has not had a bad game. And it makes you wonder how many more games. We talk about how many games you win if Hugh isn't the coach. How many more games were won if he's on the defense the whole year?
Oh, yeah.
And you're not struggling with getting into your fourth cornerback playing, as your second cornerback, your fourth and fifth corner playing big time starters minutes on this team. If he's not injured early in the year like that.
Let's go to quick negatives, and then we can have our final thoughts on this game, and then we can move on. Higgins drop and Higgins fumble and Jarvis fumble. I was completely shocked when Rashard Higgins dropped that wide open touchdown. I mean, the dude is just known for his hands. I think Hollywood was thinking about his touchdown celebration a little too soon because you saw it. Baker, the ball was a little bit behind, but he should have still caught it. I mean, as you see the ball coming into his hands, Higgins starts turning his head and like looking basically for daylight. And I'm telling you, that guy was already thinking about scoring a touchdown.
I thought he was looking for a free safety.
Maybe that.
I thought he was looking for a hit and he heard footsteps.
I could see that too, but he's normally a guy that just hangs out. Like, he takes hits. He's not afraid to take a hit.
He was going to have to take a hit to get in the end zone. And I thought he was either looking for the daylight to get to the end zone. He knew he was going to have to make a move, or I thought maybe he felt that the safety was closer than he was. But
yeah. And then the second one, Jarvis, you did so many great things. So many great things in this game. Buddy, listen. You got that ball hanging out there in front of you and then one-handing the ball like with defenders around you. That thing's getting popped out. As I tweeted, you carry the ball like an idiot, you're going to get it stripped like an idiot. But the beautiful thing is, and again, as we've talked about a couple of times now, this football team, this majority average football team, has the ability to make up for mistakes like that. Turnovers like those 2 fumbles, drop touchdown like that drop touchdown from Higgins, those are things that cripple the Browns teams of the past, right? They're the things that cripple Hugh Jackson-led football teams. But Baker Mayfield and the culture that Greg Williams, Freddie Kitchens, and the rest of the coaching staff have installed since Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley went out the door here have this team believing that even when bad shit happens, they can still win this game. So I think that's huge, and that's one of my biggest takeaways from this football game, is that bad shit happened that usually derails the Cleveland Browns, and it didn't. And not only did it not derail this team, they continued to push, and they closed out a football game at home with a huge win, continued to send the Carolina Panthers reeling. I think that's their 6th loss in a row, I believe it is now. 5th or 6th loss in a row. I mean, Andrew bottled up Christian McCaffrey, which we talked about with Lane, one of the biggest dual threat players in the league. So great job by the Browns. I really don't have too much more to say on that. This isn't your same old Browns team, and Baker Mayfield is the real deal.
There really wasn't a lot of negatives. There were some bad penalties at times. You wanted to clean the penalties up, but some of that could have been on the ref. I want to say thank you to Cam Newton for missing a open touchdown pass on 4th down that 8 out of 10 NFL quarterbacks have to complete, and Cam Newton, having one of his best years ever, has to complete. Thank you, Cam. Thank you, Cam, for Chris Carter's trying to say that was a miscommunication between Cam Newton and the wide receiver on the game-ending interception, and there was no possible miscommunication there. Cam Newton just sailed that ball. I'm not saying that the Browns defense didn't step up and make plays, but Cam Newton had a touchdown on 4th and goal. I know this is Victory Monday. I'm not supposed to rain in the parade or be a wet blanket. But was that not a touchdown?
Oh, yeah.
On fourth
he
down?
just completely missed him.
It's got to be hit. It just does. And Cam knows that. Cam will tell his whole team, hey, we had that game. That's my bad. I missed that. And that interception at the end, I mean, he sailed that one. He was trying to put 100 miles an hour on that football, and it just sailed on him.
Oh, yeah.
But
that shoulder injury is bad. Like, I bet after the season comes out, or even if they fall completely out of playoff contention here the next week or so, they shut him down, and you find out that he needed surgery. He can't throw the ball with any sort of accuracy after like 15 yards. It's bad.
Which it's amazing how great of a season he's had.
Oh, yeah.
And even what he's been doing, trying to gut through and play that out.
Yep.
So,
no, he's definitely having one of his best seasons as a pro. That's all I have on the Panthers game. What about you? That about it?
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add at that point. Look, it's fun to watch the Cleveland Browns this year. While we're talking about far-fetched playoff scenarios, like the Steelers losing out and the Browns winning out, or
we're usually hosting a whole podcast talking about the draft right now.
We don't have to really talk about the draft. And here's the other thing. Whether they make the playoffs or not, we're watching a average to good NFL football team right now. I can't say they're good yet because they're sub 500, but the Browns are an average football team. And I've made this old joke before that, guys, you're not mired in mediocrity. You got to get to mediocrity. The Browns, it's been so long since the Browns have been average that it's just fun to watch a decent NFL football team that is on the rise and headed towards being a good NFL football team. And this is a dynamic Browns offense. Even in 2014, when they were winning games and they were 7-9, even in the 10-6 season, it wasn't a dynamic offense. This is a dynamic, innovative, fun offense to watch.
So there was a stat floating around on Twitter earlier, and this can lead right into our Denver Broncos conversation. The Browns, since I can't remember if it was week 6 or week 9. It had to be after the Hugh Jackson firing. They lead the NFL in offensive yards per play at 6.9. Very nice. And they're 14 of 14 in red zone conversions.
14 of 14?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So going right into this conversation, we've got the Browns and the Broncos, a little Saturday night prime time, as I was saying before, a little feeling dangerous on a Saturday night against a Broncos team that just lost to the San Francisco 49ers, has been pretty average to below average all season long. And, oh yeah, this team is 10th, I believe it is, in points given up, 26th versus the pass, and 19th versus the rush in terms of raw yardage. But on the DVOA side of it, they're a little sneaky. So the raw yardage says that they're 26th versus the pass, but DVOA says they're second. So I don't know which stat to believe right now in terms of their pass defense. I also believe, didn't Chris Harris, I think he lost for the year a few weeks ago. I'd have to double check that. But, he's one of their best defensive backs, and I think he was lost for the year. So we have a game coming up this Saturday night, Browns versus the Broncos. You have Case Keenum as the starting quarterback for the other team. Not a guy that's going to push you deep, not a guy that's going to take the top off. And I look at this game and I say, this should be a very, very similar game plan to the one the Browns just put together against the Carolina Panthers. Now, Keenum's arm is a little better than Cam's right now in terms of not having a hurt shoulder, so he can attack deep. But this is a Broncos team that traded Demaryius Thomas away, got some more snaps, opened up some for their rookie Cortland Sutton that many of us wanted here in Cleveland. But this is a team and an offense that is completely, right now, all about their undrafted rookie running back, Phillip Lindsay. This guy has absolutely come out of nowhere to have one of the top 3, probably top 4 rookie offensive seasons going on right now in the league. Everybody talks about Saquon Barkley. Everybody talks about Nick Chubb. They talk about Baker Mayfield. Lindsey's not getting enough love. All right. They drafted Royce Freeman to be the guy. Freeman was the pick in the 3rd round. Lindsey was the undrafted guy. Lindsey's come out here, 168 rushes for 967 yards and 9 touchdowns, 29 catches for 210 yards and a touchdown. He has big play ability. If this Browns defense continues to do a poor job wrapping up the ball carrier, Philip Lindsay is going to take one to the house. He is going to break a 50, 60-yard rush if the Browns do not stop him within the first 4 or 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. He is going to break off a big play. He's a big play machine. His legs don't stop churning. He's got a lot of big playability in him. That's it. My whole thought on this entire game right now and what the Browns need to do to defeat the Denver Broncos on the road on a primetime Saturday night game, it all starts around doing whatever the hell you have to do to slow down Lindsay. And that was the same conversation that you and I had last week on the pod about Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and this is one of those games where it is exactly the same thing. What scares me here is not that the Denver Broncos are going to destroy you through the air. The Browns have done a decent enough job against the pass this year that I'm not afraid of Case Keenum torching the Cleveland Browns through the air. It comes down to, again, can you stop the running game? And I think you see that when the Browns defense does a good job against the run, they usually do a good job. I also think this game is more about, and this is insane for me to say this, but the Cleveland Browns are becoming more about what offense shows up and what they do when they have the football than what the other team does. If the Cleveland Browns come out and their offense is firing on all cylinders, they have the ability to go punch for punch with most teams in the league. There are offenses that are better. There are offenses they're not going to outplay. But this offense is developing. It's coming into its own. And with a couple more pieces in the future, look out, you could have one of the more dynamic offenses in the league. And I'd look for two things. I'd look for, again, it comes down to how clean can you keep Baker Mayfield? When you give Baker Mayfield time, just like in college, when you give him time, Baker Mayfield gets the job done and he looks amazing. In college, when Baker Mayfield struggled was when there was a little more pressure on him. And a lot of quarterbacks struggle when there's more pressure on them. Almost all quarterbacks do. The Browns can go into Denver and keep Baker Mayfield clean and give him time in the pocket and not have him running for his life. And if they can contain the Broncos on the ground, I think they've got a good shot of getting out of there with a win. A very good shot of getting out of there with a win. And then having this town really fired up because I got a feeling the Steelers are going to lose next week.
The Steelers have a tough ending of the year schedule. Don't they play they have the Patriots and the Saints, and then who's their other game?
Oh, the good old Bungles. That's the problem. That losing
the
out
Hugh
looks
Jackson
real good until they get to the Bengals.
So I just looked it up for the Broncos, and it's showing Chris Harris on the depth chart, but I thought he got injured. Maybe it wasn't as bad. Maybe it wasn't as serious as it was supposed to be. So if he's out, that would be huge for the Browns. But if he's in, that's obviously a big deal, and he'll likely be lined up. Oh no, he fractured his fibula. He's done. Yeah, no, he there's no way he's playing. They must have just not updated the depth chart because. Yeah, it says he suffered a lower leg injury, and yeah, no, he's not playing with fractured fibula. If he plays with a fractured fibula, he's a man of all men. Not everybody can be Kelly Holcomb and play an entire football game with a fractured fibula, I think is what he did. But anyways, so that's huge. Chris Harris is out, because they would have just lined up Harris on Jarvis. So now you're looking at maybe somebody like Bradley Roby, who the Browns, as those of us here, Browns fans in Ohio, he's a Buckeye, so we all love Buckeyes, but he has not been the greatest. He had some really bad games early on, had a few games where he came back and played well, but they don't really have anybody. If Chris Harris is out, they don't have anybody in that secondary that can really slow down the likes of Jarvis Landry and Antonio Callaway, and I can't believe I'm saying these positive things about the Browns receivers not being slowed down. So, but for me, again, it all goes back to that Philip Lindsay matchup, and then on the other side of the ball, offensive linemen continuing to do what they've been doing, because you're going up against Von Miller and the man that many people felt we quote unquote passed on for Denzel Ward in Chubb. So you're going up against quite the pass rushing duo over there for the Denver Broncos. And our offensive line has been keeping Baker Mayfield, as you mentioned earlier, keeping him upright, keeping him clean. And this could be that one situation where, all right, if the Denver Broncos go back and they look at the Houston Texans tape and they say, what did the Texans do in the first half against Baker Mayfield that made him not comfortable in the pocket, that made him rush some of those throws and force some of those throws downfield and not be the Baker Mayfield that you saw all game against the Panthers? not be the Baker Mayfield that you saw in the second half against the Texans. If I'm the Broncos, I'm looking at that first half against the Texans, and I'm saying, all right, what did they do with JJ and Clowney? Because that's essentially what your quote-unquote, Miller and Chubb might not be as good as Clowney as Watt, but Von Miller's one of the elite pass rushers in the game. Chubb has shown some awesome ability this year.
He's got a shot at Javon Curse's 14.5 sack record as a rookie.
Right. So you're looking at those two guys, and you're saying, on the offensive side of the ball, we have to do whatever we need to do to make sure that those two guys do not disrupt early and get Baker Mayfield out of his rhythm. So that's where I'm focusing on this game. Those are the two biggest areas for me.
Yeah, we're going to see if Freddie Kitchens learned something from the Texans game. We talked a lot about the game planning they had to do to keep the Texans off balance, both offensively and defensively. But we both felt that the Browns they took themselves out of that game. By instead of coming out and saying, let's see if they can stop what we do well, the Browns changed what they did and came out passive because they seemed a little bit afraid to try to stand up and just block those guys. As Jake said at times you're just going to have to block them. So this is a test for Freddie Kitchens to see what he learned from the failure of that offensive game plan in the first half against the Texans.
So with that said, let's go to predictions. Because, we've talked a lot on this episode. We had a great interview with Lane. Start with you. What are you thinking, Mr. Doom and Gloom, from last week?
Well, we are not fully in the upside down, Bob, because I'm going to double down on my prior negativity and back to the normal Scott with the Cleveland Browns. The running game has been the Browns' kryptonite. They did bottle up McCaffrey pretty well. I don't think they do it this week, and I think that they don't have an answer on this offensive line where I say the best that I've looked at times this year has been approaching mediocrity, and I think there's too much pressure on Baker Mayfield and too much of a running game from the Broncos, and I think the Browns go out and lose this game something like 31-17.
Wow. So Denver wins, huh?
Denver Broncos. I hate John Elway still. I hate the Denver Broncos. They are my most hated franchise ever because my first Browns moment is the drive. That's the first real game that I can remember is the drive, and I hate them. But I think one more time, the Broncos are going to make me feel some pain as a Browns fan. The Browns' kryptonite is a pass rush, and I don't know if the Browns have the ability to keep Baker Mayfield clean with those two guys coming after him. And I think that's where you could see this look a lot like the Texans game, where they outthink themselves a little bit. They take themselves out of the rhythm of what they do best. They're not comfortable. And that pass rush throws everything off. And the Browns have had problems. The Browns were helped last week by the fact that Cam Newton is struggling because of that shoulder injury to have any velocity and accuracy on passes downfield, which makes it easier to come in and take the run away because you don't have to be as concerned about where the passing game is going and you can focus on it. Case Keenum isn't an all-star. He's not an all-pro. He's not a pro bowler. But right now, you might not have as many problems with that ball going downfield as Cam Newton did with the accuracy into some of those windows. So I think there's some different problems that will allow the run game to be more effective for Denver this week. I mean, why would I change my analysis from the last 3 weeks? It's the exact same game the last 3 weeks. It's the Texans game all over again. It's the Carolina game all over again. It's the same game. Can you stop a team on the ground, and can you keep Baker Mayfield from getting put on the ground?
I like it. Stay on brand. Stay picking them to lose because they've pretty much won all but like one or two of the losses that you picked this year. So I'm feeling good about this. You know what?
Might be an ulterior motive there, people.
I like that 31 number. Really like that 31 number because it's been in my brain for the past 24 hours. Because the Cleveland Browns are going to win this football game 31-14. They are going to go into Denver looking at the team immediately ahead of them in the standings on their quest to win out and potentially be in the playoffs. Baker Mayfield's going to look across that field, and he's just, you know what he's going to see over there? He's going to see TCU. He's going to see the Kansas Jayhawks. He's going to see all of those teams that he made his bitch in college. And he's just going to be like, I'm fired up. We're in Baker country now. You remember when John Elway terrorized the Browns? This is the first time Baker Mayfield gets to terrorize John Elway. This is the opportunity for the Cleveland Browns, for Baker Mayfield to go out there in primetime and start his first primetime game, because the Jets game he came in relief, and what did he do in that game? Led him to victory. Baker Mayfield loves the lights. He loves the attention. Baker Mayfield is going to come into this game. I don't even know if dangerous is the word that can describe what Baker Mayfield's going to be feeling for this game.
What's the next level from dangerous?
Supernova?
I like it.
He's going to be feeling like supernova out there. And I feel like you're going to see him. They're going to be blaring Phil Collins for him out there before the game starts. He's going to be playing the air drums, getting hyped up for this game. But no, in all seriousness, I think that this is a game the Browns can win, and I think they should win handily. I think this is going to be that game that you finally see. We've kind of talked about, like, we've had the wins. The Falcons game was a big one. The Bengals game, the first half, was that statement, right? They came out, punched him in the face, backed up what Randall was saying, juiced up because he was on the sideline. I think this is the first game that they come out and it's just a wire to wire. Like, you're never going to feel like this game is in question. Once they get the lead early in the first half, like, it's, even when you're watching the Bengals game, you're like, oh shit, here we go again. Even though you're still comfortable, like, oh no, man, if they score here, then they're right back in it. I think this is going to be that game where everybody just sits back and goes, we've made it. Baker Mayfield is here. Cleveland Browns win 31-14. That's my prediction. I'm sticking to it because I also guess I have to stay on brand with being the overly positive guy.
I really, I feel bad for you because if I'm on the podcast, you've got to be the overly optimistic guy. I kind of was out of that realm for a while, but I've fallen back into it recently.
Hey, keep doing it because they win when you do it.
The team is going in the right direction, and Bob, I want to be where you are with this team. I just don't feel that it's there yet. It's close. Part of me says they're going to roll through these last 3 games, win out, and somehow, some way, 8-7-1 is going to get into the playoffs. I just can't let myself get there yet.
You don't want that. You don't want that possibility. I get it.
God, could you imagine how awesome it would be if they win these next 2 games and the Steelers lose these next 2 games, and what this town would be heading into Week 16 with the Browns playing the Ravens, knowing that if they win and the Steelers lose, they're the force. What would they be? They'd be in the playoffs. Yeah, as the 4 seed. They'd be in the playoffs.
I believe they would mean they would be hosting a playoff game because they're a division winner as well. But speaking of that, watch out for this. So before we get into our OBR subscriber questions to wrap up the pod, that Week 17 game against Baltimore on the road, it's a flex. It's been a flex possibility all year long. They may end up, if the Browns win this week against the Broncos, because I think the flex has to be done next week. I think it has to be like a 2-week advance notice or something. I bet if they beat the Broncos on Saturday night, you'll hear it announced right away on Sunday before those games that Week 17 matchup against the Ravens is going to get flexed to the Sunday night game.
Wouldn't that just be, and you know that if you win it, you're in? Because the Steelers would have already played?
Yeah, that would be even crazier. Man. But yeah, no, so it'll be fun. All right, let's get into our OBR subscriber questions because we got quite a few of them. Thanks for everybody for submitting as always. Starting out with Kudra Tab. How soon, and this was big news today, how soon until Reggie McKenzie is hired by the Browns front office? For those of you out there listening, Reggie McKenzie, general manager of the Raiders, was relieved of his duties today. Former Packers front office member, has worked with all of those, the Elliott Wolf, Alonzo Highsmith, worked with John Dorsey when he was there, and he has connections, I believe, to Scott McLaughlin. I don't know if I pronounced his last name wrong. I'm hoping I did. Who I don't know exactly what their connections are, but has connections there. And as we all know, Scott has been consulting with the Browns office on draft and all of that. My first thought here, Reggie McKenzie should be a sought after man. Like, somebody should be looking for him to join their front office in a high profile role, if not in the GM role again. If Reggie wants to chill for a little bit and come hang out with his buddies and come on as in a consultant role like Scott McLaughlin is, I'm all for it. I don't know if it's going to be a how soon thing until he's hired by the front office, Kudra Tab, but I definitely think it's something that, just add to the all-star cast that's in this front office.
It makes perfect sense with all the connections. If he's willing to take a step away from being a general manager for a bit, it makes absolutely perfect sense. And why would you not add someone who found a lot of the talent that he did find on that team over the last 7 years. For a moment, the Raiders were the hot up-and-coming team.
Oh, yeah. He had a lot of good picks. Next question, Brett. Not to take anything away from the Browns' execution yesterday, but I would be curious on your take as to how Newton's injury is affecting him and how it impacted the game. He looks to me like he's not really stepping into throws and certainly not running much, presumably to avoid injury. Good win yesterday. Have fun hooting it up. We definitely had fun hooting it up on this podcast. We talked about this. You talked about it a lot, about Cam. I think that the first thing that's pretty apparent is he does not trust himself throwing the ball past like 15, 20 yards. There were shots he could have had that he did not take. You can tell when the ball was coming out, it didn't have the normal Cam Newton velo because he's known for that big, strong, big, strong arm. I think it really impacted him. I think the Browns defense knew that. And that's why the Browns, Greg Williams defense just said, hey, Ian Thomas, go ahead and hit him 9 times for 77 yards in his first game filling in for Olsen. More underneath, yeah, you can have that. Curtis Samuel, sure, rack up 80 yards. Whatever you guys want underneath, have at it. You're just not beating us over the top.
Yep. And I think it's probably a big part of why, as I said, you didn't get the completion in the end zone on fourth down and goal, and it probably should have been. And you didn't, and you got that last interception because he tried to reach back for that traditional velocity to put it in that window, and it sailed on him. I mean, I think it absolutely significantly impacted the game and helped the Browns contain McCaffrey.
Next question. Rainer Dog. This is a long one. Run blocking. There was an excellent article laying out how good Chubb has been with yards after contact. My concern is yards before contact. Sobo has mentioned in the past that all teams utilize some zone blocking a la Shanahan in the run game. I'm just not sure I'm seeing it as noted in Chubb's not looking for the cutback lane this past week with a seemingly wide open field in one play particular. I do remember that play. I lost my mind at the bar. Football Outsiders has the Browns listed at 21st at the line adjusted yards, which I interpret as yards before contact. Worse, though, is they have them ranked 32nd at power rank and 30th at stuffed rank. With a lot of money and resources in Treader, Zeitler, and Batonio, I would have expected better. Also, Robinson was supposed to be a mauler in the run game. I know the stats are skewed some from Harrison, and Treader's ankle injury isn't helping. Thoughts? As always, thanks.
I think a lot of it's on the offensive line. I think all of it is. I don't know why you're having consistent problems with this offensive line, just moving the man in front of them off the ball. It could be injuries. It could be scheme. It could be that teams are keying on the run because earlier they didn't. I mean, it wouldn't be now because Baker Mayfield's lighting teams up. But whether it's Duke Johnson, whether it's Nick Chubb, or whether it's Carlos Hyde, running backs have been working hard to gain 3 and 4 yards. I mean, we talked a lot about Carlos Hyde working his ass off to gain whatever yards he could gain. We're talking about Nick Chubb sometimes making 2 guys miss in the backfield for a gain of 0 yards. There was a play where Duke Johnson got his one handoff yesterday, and he was met in the backfield, barely got the handoff. I mean, I'm waiting for someone to take a handoff and just be there to take the handoff because they're through that fast. There's significant problems on this offensive line run blocking, and quite honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if the Browns attempted to do a major overhaul on this offensive line, and I'm not sure anyone outside of Joe Batonio could be considered safe on this offensive line at this point.
Yeah, to hop in, I mean, Hubbard has been atrocious this year at right tackle. I mean, his play has been better since Kitchens took over because Kitchens has been dialing up plays that get the ball out of Baker's hands quicker or, getting away from the areas where they could be impacted. He's really taken a look at this offensive line as a whole and said, all right, where are our negatives? Let's remove plays that go that direction from the playbook, or let's try to scheme something up, give that guy extra help. So Rainer, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I think that there's been, J.C. Treader, very, very, to use Scott's analogies here, or Scott's very, very mediocre to average player. That's just what he is. We expected more out of him coming over from the Packers. I mean, that deal was relatively cheap because he was coming off the knee injury. But as you mentioned with Sobo, Sobo has noted a few times throughout the year that he's not as stout at the point of attack as you would like out of your center. Now, we're a little bit spoiled here. We have to watch Alex Mack play center for many years. So I said all along in the offseason, and we have Austin Corbett being trained behind closed doors on the center position, and he's the guy they presume to be the future at the center position. But I was talking about during the draft, hey, I want a project center. Get me somebody in the 5th round that can play the interior of the line that we can really focus on being that center of the future and work with him. Just turns out that ended up being Austin Corbett with the first pick in the 2nd round, but I digress. I've lost my mind about that on this podcast 1 or 2 times already.
I also think that some of these guys on the line could see their play elevated if you put them next to better players. It's not that you have to overhaul the entire line. All of a sudden, if you put Hubbard next to a plus right guard, you might see his play elevate a little bit because he's not as worried. He can focus on making sure he doesn't get beat to the outside and doesn't have to worry maybe if he gets beat on the inside because maybe he has some help there. You know, there's a phenomenon in sports where all of a sudden you see Cleveland Browns players for years would show up on other teams and you're like, oh, all of a sudden this guy can play well on a playoff team, right? Well, that's because on the Cleveland Browns, he might have been the best player on the roster. And on this playoff team, he's the 10th best player on the defense. And all of a sudden, he doesn't have to do those things. He's not asked to do those things. You know, you look at Jamie Collins' play has gone down. Now, part of that is the injury, but maybe part of that is because he's being asked to be, when he came over, the best player on the Browns defense, where he didn't have to be that on a team like the Patriots. So with this offensive line, it could very well be that what you've got is a bunch of guys who are mediocre to average, but if you put them next to better players, you'd see their game elevate a little bit too because you hide some of those weaknesses and take some of the pressure off of them.
You know what's fun about what you said is I'm going to take it and I'm going to flip it. So you see guys like Bitonio and Zeitler, very, very good guards in this league, have proven it here. Bitonio, Zeitler proved it with the Bengals for many years. Now they're being asked to be exposed. And what I mean by that is while you said, you know, maybe Hubbard would be better if he had somebody performing a little bit better than Zeitler to the right of him or to the left of him, maybe Zeitler is worrying too much about trying to cover for Hubbard's ass, and he's missing out on the normal assignments and everything that's made him one of the best guards in the league for all these years. Maybe he's missing out on that. Bitonio had the freaking best offensive lineman in Browns history, one of the best offensive linemen in NFL history to the left of him his entire career. Now you remove Joe Thomas from the equation. You put, first off, he went out, Bitonio was playing left tackle, then came back inside. Then you put an undrafted rookie outside of him. Then you put a guy on his last opportunity in the NFL, probably in Robinson. So I'm going to flip it around.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is dead on, but I'm going to just flip around and say our really good players are now concerned about the not so good players playing outside of them.
I'm going to blame my mind melting for multiple long work days here.
It happens.
And you are dead right. I had the right analogy. I grabbed for the wrong player to make the analogy. If I stopped for 3 seconds to think about it, the guards are where you're okay.
Yeah. And
if you fill in with better players at center and tackle on this line, I think you'll see the guard play on this line will elevate, and it won't seem as mediocre at those spots. It's not the whole line that needs overhauled, but I'd say it's probably 3/5 of it. Yeah. You might be able to salvage Hubbard.
Great question, Rainer. That sprung up a good conversation, and you messed with Scott's head, so it gets a double star. So if you have gold stars at home,
you know nothing, Scott Kennison.
If you have double stars at home, gold stars, give yourself 2 of them. 2 more questions to go, and then we'll get you all out of here. W100BLY, who DM'd me and said it really doesn't mean anything. So wobbly, W100ly, it really doesn't mean anything at all. If Freddie Kitchens continues calling plays at a high level through the final 3 games of this season and maybe playoffs, do you think that lessens the chance the new head coach comes from the offensive side of the ball? Does this lean more toward a defense, Williams, Flores, Richard, etc., Taub, or college candidate? I would hate for these offensive improvements to be all for naught. We kind of talked about that before, Scott, and I don't think it lessens the chance that it comes from the offensive side of the ball, but I think it opens you up to considering candidates that you may have not considered earlier.
So earlier in the year, I was dead set against Bruce Arians because I said I wanted Bruce Arians 5 years ago. Freddie Kitchens growing into being a play caller and what he's shown to me opens up the concept of going and getting a guy like Bruce Arians to where maybe you're not looking for a guy who wants to come in and call his own plays. Hugh Jackson wanted to come in and call his own plays. So you're not necessarily, you're having a conversation with the coach saying, we have an offensive coordinator and a play caller. We want you to come in and be the coach and manage the entire game and be that. I've used this analogy before. I want you in at the CEO level, the 10,000 foot level on the sideline that day, working through your management staff and letting Kitchens run half the game and letting your defensive coordinator run the other half of the game. And you're over there making sure that the game plan is being executed as it's supposed to and managing the game overall and jumping in where you're needed throughout the game. So that to me is more of a Bruce Arians type of guy. It may be less of a John DeFilippo type of guy. If you're that's to me what it opens up. So I actually think it opens up the coaching staff to say anyone can come in, offensive or defensive minded coach, as long as you're willing to accept that we've got the guy who's going to be calling the offense and running half of this team on game day. You run the team, but this is the guy who's going to manage that game on the micro level on Sunday. That's what I think the evolution of Freddie Kitchens says.
Final question comes from friend of the show, friend of OBR, Shrooney, and everybody else, your friends too, but Shrooney always has questions for us like Kudra does. So McCaffrey went from all-world to fairly well-contained. What changed? Did the Browns just want to make Scott eat crow for his gloom and doom pick? Shrooney, Scott went gloom and doom again. Like, he didn't learn his lesson. He went gloom and doom again.
I do what I can do to make the Browns win.
Yes, he's just here he's going to bite the bullet and have to eat crow every single week so we can all celebrate Victory Mondays.
If I was another podcaster in this town, I would tell you that I have that type of influence in Berea and in the locker room, and they know my takes and they know me. And the Browns used this podcast as bulletin board material to be extra motivated to go shut down the run last week. I think, as we said earlier, it had a lot to do with Cam Newton not really being a threat to push the ball downfield more than 15 or 20 yards. And the Browns said, go ahead and take that. We're going to take your most dynamic weapon away from you. And anyone else on this team is going to have to beat us aside from him.
I'm really interested to see Jake's breakdowns for our subscribers on the OBR this week. I'm sure one of them is going to be looking at the defense and what they did right. I think that when you look back and watch this game again, what you're going to see is Cam's inability to drive the ball deep kind of did what teams have been doing against us for years, shrinking the field, allowing players to come up in the box, allowing guys to not be concerned about what's going to go behind them because they didn't, they're not concerned about Cam's arm. So they have to focus on playing downhill, but also Shrooney, as Lane said, you got to give a big helping hand and a thank you to our former offensive coordinator, Norv Turner, because McCaffrey got it going early, had the 2 touchdowns, had a third one, but it was called back due to the penalty. And Norv just kind of went away from how he was using McCaffrey early. What was impressive about it was this. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, Scott, about finally having the guy. The Carolina Panthers' offensive game plan changed because of Baker Mayfield. They got away from grinding it out, running the football with Christian McCaffrey because they couldn't stop Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield was doing whatever he wanted. And, Clifford Franklin, that's how I feel. Every time I say Baker Mayfield, I'm like, Clifford Franklin, he came to play. And when Clifford Franklin comes to play, he comes to play. But no, Baker Mayfield came out there and he forced the Carolina Panthers offensive game plan to change. He forced Norv Turner to go away from the all-world stud in Christian McCaffrey. But at the same time, you got to give the Browns defense credit. They made a lot of tackles that they normally don't make. There were some plays on McCaffrey where I was like, he's going to break that tackle and go. And then the Browns actually made that tackle. So the defense came to play. They shut him down with an assist from Norv Turner going away from what worked for him.
Yeah, a combination of things, as you opened it up, or Lane opened it up, he said Norv Turner threw it away. But overall, it was just, you can't, as much as I said, some of it's on Cam, you can't take anything away from the effort the defense put out there to bottle him up.
Well, on that note, Scott, I think it's time to end the podcast because we probably went way longer than we thought we were going to, as always. So
we got in under an hour and a half today.
Yes. Well, hopefully we're at 1 hour and 27 again, just for our one guy.
Not quite, even after I add in some intro music and Lane's intro and exit music that I've been searching for better music.
Yeah, I was going to say, they've been giving you crap about that.
It's what I have licenses for, people. It's what I have licenses for.
It's the internet. Just play whatever. I'm kidding. Well, everybody out there, as always, thank you so much for listening, for subscribing. OBR subscribers, we love you. Thank you for all the questions. Keep them coming. Keep tweeting us. Please refrain from the death threats, because we would appreciate not having to call you out at the beginning of the show. Unless you want to be called out at the beginning of the show, then go ahead, send us death threats. We're here for that. But yeah, Scott, appreciate you as always for bringing the heat, bringing the fire, and bringing the energy on the podcast. And on that note, everybody, until next week, until next Victory Monday, go Browns.